Are you going? You can. Right, hello everybody. I'm looking around for new faces and there aren't any apart from Tony Oakman, who's portfolio lead for a digital city, etc. So, I've had a request. Let's have apologies first. Let's follow the agenda rather than just make it up. So, apologies. Have you got any apologies? Is that it? Fine, nothing extra. Okay, thank you. Announcements, I'm going to move section 7, which is Tony's report, to the first report, because he's got to get back to Bolton, I understand. So I'll just do the sort of housekeeping stuff, and then we'll come on to you. So that's my announcement. Declarations of interest, any declarations of interest, the usual fire one, I presume. Nobody else. On to the minutes, any comments? We've all had the minutes. Any comments on the minutes at all? Can I have a proposer for the minutes? Don't rush. Peter, seconder. I'll second them. There, done. And on that, straight on to Tony Oakman from Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm actually here for Councillor Andrew Weston, Portfolio Lead for Digital City Region. You have a very succinct and hopefully clear report in front of you, which makes some specific recommendations in regards to expenditure in terms of the next phase of work for full fibre programme across all 10 districts of GM. Just to give you a little bit of a context and then to maybe have a little conversation in terms of where we got to, Alison, colleague here from Gmca, will show you some visuals in terms of the full fibre programme, where it covers, and we'll talk to that, and then we'll take some questions if that's okay, Chair. I mean, this is a good news story for Gmca, I have to say. As part of the Mayor's digital strategy and part of the ambition of all 10 districts, in simplest terms, this is about putting the infrastructure in across GM to ensure ensure that capacity and speeds for digital are enhanced across all areas. Now, you'll understand that this is critical in terms of a range of areas, from how citizens access their information, how businesses can make sure they're getting the right skills and capabilities down the line in terms of investment and developments. It's also important for us as public sector in terms of our reform agenda that we're working on modern technology and modern infrastructure. As a consequence of our ambition in GM, we secured from government £23.8 million via DCMS, which obviously we have been in significant conversations and liaison with all 10 districts, and I have to say including the leaders, the chief executives, to get to a position where we have a very clear plan in terms of implementing this ambitious plan. Before we get into the recommendations specifically, I would ask Alison just maybe to talk to a couple of the slides in terms of some of the information to give you a sense in terms of the coverage.
Thank you, Tony. Hopefully these are relatively clear. What the grant and the local authority, as well as GMCA investment buys us, is 450 kilometres of full fibre, so dark fibre, across Greater Manchester. The way we are managing this is we are connecting public sector buildings and public sector assets. And we can do that within state aid rules, that we are not distorting the market. So what that allows us to do is put enough fibre in the ground that starts to become attractive to other providers to build out from that fibre. So as you can see from here, what we've done is look to try and build out from the main town centres. We've done something slightly different in Tameside. Tameside, as you may know, has a cooperative fibre model, and part of that was funded under the first phase of this funding. So what we've done is, in effect, taken Tameside out of our model and allowed them to put their funding to extend their cooperative. I can't believe this is working. This is very good. Again, the bit that's hugely important about this is how many of Greater Manchester's premises this will pass. So it'll pass 30% of premises. significant number of domestic properties and a very significant number of businesses. And what that means is connectivity costs for those businesses that are running close will get a lot cheaper, but it also starts to become very attractive for providers to be able to provide broadband to those businesses. What this will also do is encourage the rest of the market to build out from here. So in effect, we are putting public sector funding in to kickstart the market here, and it will grow out from there. Our modelling suggests that we will be increasing coverage from about 2% fibre to the premise, which is kind of about average in the UK, through to 25% in 3 years. That will mean we are the most connected city region in the UK. So it gives us a huge base to be able to build from. And that's in relation to some of the ambitions around 5G and some of the ambitions, some of the things you've heard about with Internet of Things and being able to connect everything from autonomous vehicles to assisted living to what have you. We've got to have this fibre in the ground. Now, this last slide shows what we've tried to do is to map over some of the strategic allocations within the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework within here as well. So as you can see, for the vast majority of strategic sites, the fibre is likely to run close by. Again, what we are not doing with this investment is connecting those strategic sites. We can't do that with this funding. It's about connecting public sector premises. But actually getting fibre through close to those means that it becomes easier and cheaper for providers to be able to connect those sites. So it increases the number of connected sites within Greater Manchester. I wasn't going to do any more slides. I just thought it would be helpful to kind of give you a visual about how it sits in Greater Manchester.
Okay, Chair, final points then. So this is about investment going forward. So we have acquired 23.8. As it states on the recommendations and is captured in Appendix A, the investment is match funded £1.46 million worth of capital from Gmca, Fire and Rescue Service, 3.384 capital from Gmca, Urban Traffic Management Control in terms of TFGM. The remaining residual funds are captured in Appendix A from each district, and those have been negotiated and agreed, so there's no last minute here. There's complete line of sight on this, an agreement, and the procurement process is captured in Section 3. I know Richard wants to make one additional point about the financing, if that's okay, Chair, and then I think it's open to questions.
Just on the, if you look at the recommendation, it deals with the funding of the 8 districts who are in the sort of main pot of money. But on page 8, it does talk about Manchester City Council, who are using a different approach to public sector upgrades, and the proposal to grant fund them directly outside of this particular procurement. And when we get to the combined authority, we'll wrap in an extra recommendation to that effect, so Manchester don't get left out of this.
To the floor. Don't say it's just me. Go on, say it, Anne.
Thank you for that. You make it sound very straightforward. I assume it isn't. It talks about a large and complex programme. I just wonder if and the money has to be spent by March 2021. If you could just talk a little bit around some of the risks and challenges for that for us, I think it would be useful. What happens if it doesn't get completed?
That's my job to try and make it as simple as possible. But if I just talk about the journey we got here, the original intention was work with NHS partners and CCG in terms of public sector. But I think it's fair to say in this session here that market forces began to play, that one major supplier in the market decided to, should we say, incentivise the NHS to think differently about their future contracts, which I think required us to very quickly think about how we would find an alternative host to work in partnership with us. And I'm glad to say again, indicative of GMCA's approaches, TFGM, Transport for Greater Manchester, were kind of key in helping us to think about how we might deliver the same outcomes. The intention is clearly, from our point of view, to spend the money, so therefore the front loading of this approach. So it talks at Section 3 about the different contractual procurement arrangements. So therefore we are going to, let's put it bluntly, make sure that we spend the money that we've got from government first before we start to dip into other resources. There are other significant challenges in terms of coordination. You've heard this said many times, can we dig out the roads once? I had quite a struggle getting here on the roads. It's a pleasure to be here, our 10 minutes. But the realities are we don't want to have multiple initiatives that work off in splendid isolation. So we are working hard with each local authority to make sure they have a very clear team that is leading on both the process in terms of site identification, which is where we've got to now, to then the next phase, which is, well, we're going to make it happen, and making sure that when we get into these conversations that the physical delivery and implementation of this is coordinated. I think the final point is obviously the procurement and the market, but I think, I'll hand to Alison, but I think we're confident that the market, as is evidenced with the NHS, is there. But obviously what we want to do is make sure that they provide and deliver the things that we want within our specifications, not the things that they want to, shall we say, sell us. Is there anything you want to add on the market position?
The paper talks about the way we're constructing the contract, and what we're doing is we're looking at two geographically separate projects, so one for the north and one for the south. What's contained within that is going to be the same. We're looking to buy the same, which is the installation of dark fibre, but obviously the distances will be different depending on those contracts. There is a huge amount of market interest in this. Understandably, this is going to be one of the biggest rollout programmes probably anywhere in the UK at the moment. What Tony mentioned that's hugely important to this, and what we've got back from providers, is how can we and local authority partners make it easier for them to be able to install dark fibre. And a big part of that is how they reduce their costs. So it's about us getting more consistent in terms of how we work with providers, but also the permits for digging up the road, how roads and pavements and what have you are constituted afterwards, because what they will find is they'll come up to a boundary and the rules are entirely different on one side of the road to the other side of the road. So we are working with local authority partners to come up with what will be called a prospectus. So for providers, and initially this is for fibre providers, but what we're looking to do is to roll this out more broadly for utility providers, that we have a really consistent approach to this across Greater Manchester. What we expect that to do is to drive down costs. So what we expect is, this is kind of our minimum. What we would quite like is if they find this really attractive, they will start to offer us more, and that's potentially connecting other sites and what have you. But all of this is about how we make it easy. So Tony was very kind about how easy it's been, but it's about Greater Manchester kind of working together to be really consistent, and that's what will deliver us savings, but that's what will get us to a place that we're ahead of everybody else.
I'm afraid I could do more on this than the budget. So my understanding of dark fibre is it's fibre that's in the ground that is dark. So are we planning to put multi-core, so obviously you put 48 core cable in, 2 of them will serve one network, does that put the other 46 available? Are we actually going to lay unused fibre? Because we've said we're going to join public sector buildings, and if we're using TFGM, I'm thinking of the Altrincham interchange, we put one up there, right up the A56 from the centre of Manchester, great. But is it just a piece of dark fibre, or are we going to be using it? Are we going to get straight away something off the back of it in the public sector?
If I'm honest, as Chief Executive for Bolton Council, I don't want to put £780,000 into an investment that means I will get no return. So we're absolutely clear that we're going to get immediate benefit. I've not answered your question, Chair, apologies, but it's absolutely clear that we'll get immediate benefit. Where and how it leads to the options around 5G and all other developments down the line, I think it will put GM, Greater Manchester, in a unique national position in terms of digital and infrastructure technology. So I think always the eternal optimist, it can only get better and can only get stronger. But yeah, we will get a quick return on this because there's no point otherwise.
Fine. So I wouldn't perceive that to be dark fibre as such, because dark fibre. So have we done a study of GM for dark fibre? We've got the Greater Manchester Loop and stuff, which I think has been bought, hasn't it? Yes. Have we done a full study of what's in the ground already, not being used? There's a lot of it.
Where we know about it, yes, we have. And what we are doing now is working with DCMS to ask providers what they've got in the ground. Part of the reason Richard had mentioned the Manchester model being different for the City of Manchester. They've got a huge amount of fibre in the ground already, and DCMS has said what we're not going to do is overlay fibre. So we've got a team who are looking at what's in the ground. What we're not going to do is overlay dark fibre with dark fibre. Why would you? So what we are doing is making sure as we carry on with this that we're not overlaying. DCMS won't pay us for that, and it's the wrong thing to do. So we'd only look to lay dark fibre where there's not fibre in the ground already. Obviously, with the fibre, there is ducting, and providers may choose to put more through that ducting, and that is their choice if they can see that there is a market for that. Providers are well aware of the coverage that this fibre will have and how close it's getting to a whole range of premises. I think it was the slide I put up before. So the market understand the opportunity as well, and we are in effect anchor tenants for this. But the market will decide what the market needs, overlaying with the developments going on in Greater Manchester.
Has there been any work with planning departments? I've had this conversation at Traffic, because I sit on the planning. For instance, Media City on the Salford side has nothing in the ground. It's only been built 20 years, but there is nothing in the ground. So the technology exists. Not even ducting in the ground. They're using microwave over the top. 2 massive installations over there. So has there been any work for, obviously we've got the Great Manchester Spatial Framework, which has industrial premises on it. Has anybody joined that thinking to say, you know what, if you're going to put an industrial premises over there, you've got to you wouldn't put one in without putting water and electricity. I think we're at that stage. Unless we legislate for it, they're not going to do it.
We're not in a perfect world, but the bottom line is each of your respective authorities has been fully consulted, involved in terms of the plans. So, for example, I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone in this room that we're all looking at our assets, making smarter use of our assets, and shall we say disposing of assets. So what we don't want to do is put this capability into buildings or assets that are not going to be here in 5 or 10 years. It's just a waste of time. Clearly, in terms of the specific, in terms of Media City, I'll ask Alison on that. But obviously, this is about public sector, so there are some limitations in inverted commas to this. Whether that is described as public sector is another debate. But what I'm saying to you is we have worked fully with each council. On occasions, we've had to push pretty hard. I won't mention the authority, but one authority forgot to mention its town hall in the middle of this, the day before we shut down the guillotine on this. So, you know, this is kind of this is pioneering work in many senses. It's going to put your authorities on a really strong footing, but you're absolutely right. There will be some areas in terms of commercial sectors or others that might not get the immediate benefits. But I think, if I'm honest, I think there will be other further opportunities. And I think the more that we get that kind of helpful intelligence to say, hang on, there's significant areas which are not covered off here. So we've been thinking in Bolton about our logistics sites. You know, as part of the spatial plan, we've talked about making sure that the spurs go as far out towards those areas that we can start getting some benefits in terms of dark fibre.
I think that's exactly really what I'm thinking. So we've got the Airport City. I have no idea if Airport City, which is brand new, has got this. But you're right with Bolton. I think that's quite a key. You could get it for free, effectively. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Have I stimulated any other questions? Covered all ground. Great. Back to Bolton. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
That's much appreciated.
Work on a more interesting note, work programme. So I've had some comments on fire from Peter, but I think we've covered that, so I'm going to hand to you.
Thanks. I mean, this is for information. It's the updated work programme. There's just one suggestion in terms of amendments that the March meeting, we're still anticipating Jim Wallace and the detail on programme for change. So it's quite a heavy agenda. The suggestion is that we slip the second and third items that are currently there, the GMFRS overview of training and the feedback on the HSE inspection, so slip those two to the April meeting if the committee are happy with that.
I was happy with that because the programme for change we've been waiting for and is about the most important thing, I think. Any other comments on that? I propose that, Chair. Okay, I'll second it if we need seconding. I'm happy with that. That's great. And then going from IT to budgets. It's a geeky meeting today, isn't it? It really is. Welcome, Andy. Thank you for your time. Who's opening? I think Andy's opening, isn't he? Where are we up to now? 6.8. 6.8 Mayoral General Budget Overview. Andy Burnham.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. You'll have seen that we've tried to start the year with confidence and set out our stall on a range of big issues. The spatial framework, chief amongst them, but also housing vision, transport vision to support the spatial framework, clean air plan. The intention being that we wanted to break through some of the national gloom, if you like, and really get on the front foot and keep building the agenda that we've been developing since I was elected, and we're seeking to develop that even further. So that kind of spirit has been very much behind what we've been trying to do when it comes to the budget process this year. If I can, I'll just lay out what I would call the four kind of principles that have guided our thinking. The first two being what I would say are the public's two top calls in terms of when we speak to people what they want more of. I would say these are these are 1 and 2. Number one, more police. I mean, obviously the police budget is not specifically covered here, but it is obviously relevant to this discussion, given the impact it will have on council tax. More police, number one. I would say better buses, number 2. And that is an issue that's going up the political agenda all the time. But then going into the other 2 principles, we obviously want to protect the fire service through a process of change that has begun since the Kerslake review. And then fourthly, doing all of this, recognising the major pressures that there are on districts and trying to do whatever we can, where we can, to relieve the pressure. So in what we're putting forward to you, in terms of the papers that you've got, you know, we are trying to meet all of those things, and keep, as I say, our momentum in terms of the agenda that we're building, while at the same time, though, keeping it realistic, affordable, and making sure that we're not putting undue pressure on districts. So, if I just say a little more detail, then, Chair, about the specific proposal in terms of the mayoral general precept, which of course includes fire. I'll start with the proposed £9 precept, which is additional to the 8 of last year, to create an overall precept of 17. The way we have framed this is year 2 of a baseline setting process. It was always understood that there would need to be funding raised from the precept to support a process of bus reform. And what I can say to the committee this evening is this increase, the £9 that I propose, of course, would be around £7 for the vast majority of households in GM, is dedicated to that process of bus reform. That's its sole purpose. We wish to proceed at pace this year with the completion of an assessment of our options under the Bus Services Act 2017. There have been some recent press reports which suggest that there's some potential turbulence in the Greater Manchester bus market, if I could put it that way. So that's obviously there in the background, but nevertheless, we don't want to delay. As I said at the beginning, I think the call for better buses seems to get louder all of the time, and we've seen again the loss of services in recent times here and the public reaction to that. We saw in one of the national newspapers at the weekend a report on the loss of bus services across the country. So it's true that not just here, but around the country, the bus network is shrinking. And given where we are with transport in the city region, we can't allow that to continue, because already the transport system is under considerable strain, and buses are the backbone of the transport system. We urgently need to intervene in this market, in my view, to turn its fortunes around. The sad reality is, since the mid-1980s, bus patronage in Greater Manchester has been in continual decline. And in the last decade alone, Steve will correct me if I get this figure wrong, but I think we've lost around 34 million, have I got that figure right? Bus journeys a year. So we are in pretty steep decline. And I think it's partly because the economics of the bus market just don't work. We've got a kind of almost like a vicious circle, really. We've got declining patronage, therefore fares go up, routes get cut, and then the patronage goes down even further, put the pressure on to cut more routes, put up. We're trapped in this unacceptable position where bus services are becoming more expensive all the time, less extensive in terms of their coverage, and we've got to stop that. As we've all seen in the last year, levels of congestion are such that we can't sustain one part of our transport system to be in decline in the way that it is. And actually the economics of this system don't work, where it can cost more for 3 young people to take a bus than it is to get an Uber. I mean, that just simply, when the economics of the system are like that, we are not going to come up with solutions that actually solve congestion, clean up the air. We need to begin to think very differently. So as I said, the ask, which has obviously been minimised as much as we could and kept down to single figures, the ask is dedicated to this process of bus reform. And the largest element of it is the commitment around what we call the opportunity pass for 16 to 18-year-olds. I would refer members of the committee to a figure that's in your paper around the current usage of bus transport by the 16 to 18-year-old age group in Greater Manchester, paragraph 4.17. 26% of 16 to 18-year-olds say that buses are their primary mode of transport. Really, if that is the case, then we are really struggling here, because in any other city, particularly London, you would probably find that is the exact reverse of that. It would be 3/4 would use buses as their main mode, whereas here, a quarter of young people are saying it's their main mode of transport, and that is a reflection of how expensive the system is. So the rationale that I am bringing to this is that we cannot improve buses for everyone until we get more people onto the buses, until we stop the decline in the bus market. So the opportunity pass is intended to be an intervention into that market to, yes, even in the short term, put more people on the buses, and by doing that, shore up some of those routes that are currently at risk, because there are more bus routes at risk in Greater Manchester at the moment, and a scheme of this kind can actually kind of bolster the market. So we do that alongside this preparation of our assessment of the GM bus market and our options for reform. One thing is absolutely clear, and I think I reflect the view of the 10 other leaders here: the status quo is definitely not an option. We have to change this. Another thing is also clear: it can't be done by use of legal or parliamentary powers alone. That on its own does not solve our problem. It is not a particularly attractive perspective, from my point of view, to be reforming a declining market. because in the end, you know, the problem will only grow. You have to get this market growing again before then options open up as to how you can sustain routes, how you can keep fares low, how you can improve the quality of the buses. You know, without that growth, I think we are in a very, very difficult position. So that's the logic of the proposal and the way that it's been constructed. It is about getting more people on buses so that we can begin to improve buses in GM for everyone, but it will be a long haul. We would want to take an in principle decision as quickly as possible as to which route we're taking when it comes to bus reform. But that's why we need obviously the budget approval so that we can get on with that and make our assessment and then make our decision. To pick up fire then and transport before Chair opening up to colleagues' questions. As you will all know, we've been in a process of detailed consideration of the position of the fire service. The Deputy Chief Fire Officer played a very important role through the publication of the Kerslake report earlier this year, where it was recognised that the issues around the arena were actually probably symptomatic of a bigger cultural issue that we needed to consider with regard to our fire service in terms of two things. One, in terms of the way management related to the front line, but also how the fire service itself worked with other emergency services. And that review has been now ongoing for the best part of a year. And we've been looking at how we bring forward a programme of change that puts the fire service on a sustainable financial footing for the foreseeable future. When I was elected, I inherited what was called the IRMP, Integrated Risk Management Plan, which was recognising the need to take out pump capacity in the coming years, given the financial outlook. We suspended that plan, myself and the Deputy Mayor, because it was not clear to us that there was a guiding rationale for the selection of pumps to be removed and the impact that would have on response time. So the programme for change has spent a considerable amount of time considering capacity, how we redeploy it to ensure that we maintain response times. And without going into all the detail, because it's still in the final stages of being agreed, we are confident that we've come up with a set of arrangements that will, with there or thereabouts, maintain response times to all communities in Greater Manchester at their current level, give or take a few seconds. So that work has been ongoing. It has been challenging, although as part of it, we have taken steps to put the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service on a stronger footing, particularly in relation to its workforce. So there was a system in place going back a few months, which was called the roster reserve system, where firefighters could be redeployed to meet staffing shortfalls. The effect of this, though, created quite a lot of change in terms of their home life. So we've moved back towards a stable shift pattern, which, while has cost more in the short term, has had the impact, we believe, of improving work-life balance for our firefighters and hopefully has raised morale, and in time you would hope will raise productivity. And linked to that, we've moved to a new annual leave system, whereby rather than being basically given annual leave at the start of the year without any ability to choose, we moved to a new system of allowing people to choose annual leave from specified time blocks. So both of those things have been designed to sort of bring the service back together. There has been a huge amount of work done to look at the use of resources. There are issues around fire stations, and there'll be a small number of proposed changes in that regard, not wholesale changes, but a small number of changes. And we are increasingly confident now that we are putting the fire service through the programme for change on a sound financial basis going forward, but also providing a good acceptable level of cover to all communities, as well as raising issues, as well as raising morale on the front line. So the budget that we've put forward allows for this. By protecting it in cash terms and adding in funding from reserves, we believe we can do all of what we're planning to do. The third element, just to touch on, is the transport budget. As I say, it's heavily focused on bus reform. We have this strange situation where we've been waiting for a parliamentary order to be laid, which gives me the legal power to raise a levy. And it has now finally been tabled in Parliament, but there is still a question mark as to when it will complete its parliamentary passage and therefore give me the legal power to raise the precept. So that's why Richard, working with treasurers, has proposed this system where we may have to have a situation where a levy is paid and then it's paid back from the precept, which is unusual, I would accept, but it's obviously just a reflection of the delay in the laying of the parliamentary order. What we are also doing, though, recognising, as I said at the beginning, that issue of pressures on districts, we've also looked at reserves and reviewed budgets, and Richard has sought, at our request, to look at a one-off payment to districts to ease budget pressures. I think that equates to £5 million overall, but obviously then it will be distributed on a fair basis across districts. So we're recognising, as I said, that pressure that's we're trying to kind of continue with our priorities, particularly around buses, but at the same time recognising the pressure that's on you all with relation to council tax. And without to get too political, I think making the kind of observation that austerity doesn't yet appear to be over. So that's basically the broad shape of the budget, Chair. I mean, there's obviously much more detail I could go into, but I won't. I've covered the main headlines from my point of view. More than happy to take colleagues' questions.
Plethora of topics there. We'll start with John Bell. I'll then go to Stella and Tim.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andy. There are two things. Initially, you started off by talking about bus reform, and I agree entirely with you. It needs sorting out good and proper for the future. But there's a reduction in take-up in buses, but there's a massive switch to rail. And I know that you personally have been very critical of Northern Rail. Is there anything further we can do to ensure that they are running a proper railway service to the people in this region? Because it is absolutely diabolical. I know they're going to improve in as far as the rail stock is concerned, the stock, and my goodness me, I remember those as a kid, some of that stuff that they're transporting people on. So I do hope that, you know, I'd like to see a good take-up in both, but you're not going to get that, you know. But people are definitely switching to rail instead of bus, aren't they? I mean, I can do it. I can come down to Manchester by bus or rail. I choose rail because it's quicker and well, it's clean as well. On the fire service budget, there's been. And I don't want to go too much in because I was involved, obviously, before you came on the scene, Andy. But this programme for change, and, you know, I've seen so much change in the fire service in 20 years, massive. And once we get over one change, another one comes along. We have a tremendous brand in Greater Manchester, the fire service. And, I mean, as you know, I passionately believe in it. In fact, when I retire at the end of April, I'm still continue as a volunteer in the fire service. Because I feel so passionately about it. But it does concern me when I see, and there are obvious leaks from the FBU about the closure of fire stations and, you know, manning cover on appliances being dropped from 5 to 4. No doubt that's been leaked to the press and it shouldn't have been. But it does give alarm to the public. Now, the public, because we've got such a good brand, the public expect a fire engine on every corner, and they do value their own fire station. And if you take away things like that, then, you know, we tried our very best, whilst I was involved with it, never to, the last resort was to close a fire station, because we knew the sort of public reaction to it. It's like taking candy from a baby, taking the fire station away. So whilst we look for the programme for change, and obviously we don't want to be also victims of our own success in this, because I've seen that over the years, where central government bashed us.
I'm going to struggle tonight to get this in for 8, so
and the other thing is, when can we anticipate the programme for change, you know, report? Okay.
We know it's March in the work. It's just gone in the work programme. Andy.
Yeah. Okay, Chair. Well, thanks very much, John. I think that the truth of it, there's probably been a switch away from rail over the last year with the chaos on the timetable. It's hard to say exactly, isn't it? But we've definitely, TFGM have noticed an increase in traffic on some of our principal routes. So the switch has probably been from rail to car, I think, the main switch, just because people haven't been able to rely on the railways if they've got a sort of, particularly a flight or a kick-off time, you know, something that's very, very fixed. So, if anything, we think the railways are lost patronage, but probably so have buses as well, because congestion is a growing issue, and that hasn't particularly probably helped. The beneficiary has probably been Metrolink, which has been growing all of the while. The guided busway in Lee actually has performed really well through this, but that's because it's a premium bus service. So the actual outlook is a difficult one in that I would say rail is probably declining and bus is probably declining, and that is then being felt in terms of overcrowding on the roads on Metrolink. And you know, every bit of the system has to play its part if the GM transport system is going to stand up. So on this question of when are we going to get a proper service, my deadline is May, and I've said that directly at TFN. I'm a board member of Transport for the North. My patience runs out then, basically, in that, yes, some of it was caused by Network Rail. Some of it was caused by the timetable chaos that came from the overrunning engineering. But Northern Rail can't hide behind all of that. A large part of it is also their direct fault in terms of failure to sort out particularly some of their staffing issues. You know, we have a situation where the Saturday issue has only recently been resolved, and that was with the intervention of the government and ourselves. Left to their own devices, that would not have been solved. And I personally don't believe that we're going to raise confidence in the public to use railways if we're taking guards off the train. So that should have been solved, in my view, a lot sooner than it was. But then we've still got Sundays where we've still got yeah. And that is, again, that is there. I don't believe you can blame anybody else other than Northern, in my view anyway, for that particular issue. So for me, John, it's May. And if they haven't improved by May, I would certainly be using my voice on your behalf, by all means tell me if you see it differently, but to say at that point, that far and no further, you know, they do not have the right to carry on inflicting substandard services on people. And I think, you know, I would be interested to know exactly where they're up to, given the numbers of cancellations that they've been responsible for, you know, where they are up to in terms of their franchise. It's you know, it's not an acceptable state of affairs. So you know, but that's the cut-off as far as I'm concerned. And if we get to a point in May where it's still not good enough, where they're still cancelling trains, short-forming trains, at that point I think we call for franchise removal. In terms of the fire service, I agree with you absolutely about, you know, the standing of the fire service with the Greater Manchester public, with other fire services. There are some brilliant people working in our fire service. Two of them, one current, one former, represented here. You know, we're very lucky, and I've been round all of the stations with the Deputy Mayor, so we have visited every single fire station in Greater Manchester as part of this review to show people that we are absolutely listening. I think the one thing I would say, and this is no criticism of the previous fire authority, because it's obviously always a challenging role. We felt there was some neglect of the fabric at the front line in terms of the condition of some of our fire stations, particularly the issue that some of them didn't have women's toilet facilities, for instance, and women firefighters detached to those stations told to use the pub over the road. Well, I'm afraid that's nowhere near good enough. In other cases, old pumps that you know would go back 15, I think even 20 years, I think in one case, or certainly 15 years. Some signs of neglect, I would say, at the front line. Now, it's really important for me to say that, you know, the proposals haven't yet been finalised, but to the extent that there will be any closures, there will be mergers. So they will not be just removing something and saying nothing replaces it. It will be about perhaps taking two and saying, well, no, we'll build a purpose-built facility, combining the two, to then provide more modern accommodation, possibly co-located with the ambulance service, as has been done in Wigan, to some success, I would say. So that's where we're coming from. And as I say, all of this will be within maintaining response times to the Greater Manchester public, give or take a few seconds. On the issue of 5s and 4s, I mean, I am told that the majority of fire and rescue services in England are operating as 4s now. And that is obviously a reflection of funding and the way it's changed over the years. The issue here is obviously how many people attend a fire, not necessarily how many pumps attend, because that's the issue, isn't it? And you can, if it's a house fire, you can still deploy 2 pumps, so that you'll have 8. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily the numbers on a pump that determine whether or not you've got safe cover at a fire. It's the nature of the fire and how many pumps you deploy to it. So it is a debate to be had, and it's not finalised, as I say. You know, these will be proposals for consultation, but these are challenging issues that we're going to have to deal with. And as the chair said, you know, we are looking to put out proposals for consultation at or around the time that the budget is set, so March, April kind of time.
Stella.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yes, I want to go back to the buses for a moment, if that's all right, because you're quite right that bus use has been declining for a long time, and there are many reasons for that. But I think one of the principal reasons is the non-reliability of the service. Now, the private companies that run these buses, I'm told, make a very substantial profit, which goes into their shareholders, when it could be used to update the vehicles, some of which are nearly 20 years old and belching out black smoke when you see them going up the hills. And many of them are very old anyway, and probably off the road for quite a lot of the time, being repaired, and that then reduces the number that are actually in service. Some of the service routes are just ridiculous, and every couple of months we seem to get an email telling us which routes are now being cut. And it'll be all right because it's being merged with another route, which will alternate buses will go past somewhere where the original buses used to go. And if you're on one of these merged routes and you're near the end of it, the buses just don't turn up for 3/4 of an hour. Now, that's all right if you're a pensioner. Well, it isn't, but, you know, if you haven't got a job to go to or a meeting to attend or, as you say, a flight to catch, but it's just not worth it. And the trouble is that people have stopped complaining. They're no longer sending complaints to the bus companies. They just shrug their shoulders and get a taxi. And unless they're on a bus pass, it's often cheaper, as you say, to get an Uber. And I've heard, and I don't know, it's only anecdotal, that certainly one of the bus companies really is only interested in the profitable routes and wants to make that a luxury service with Wi-Fi and nice padded seats and everything beautifully clean. And the poor people who are in the more isolated communities and don't get much of a bus service because they don't use a bus much, they're just telling them to get an Uber. Now, you can't go on like that, can we? So I'm just wondering how long it's going to take, you know, to get this signed paper through Parliament, because I've sat on this committee and its predecessor for 3 years now, and it was being talked about then. And it's taken, I know there's other things in Parliament that are taking up their time, I realise that. But do we know when you said you're not sure when it's going to come through. And then can we do something about the bus companies who are going to fight tooth and nail against the franchising and against the any reforms, because it'll hit their pockets?
Well, thanks, Stella. I mean, I don't disagree with a word of what you've said around how unsatisfactory the bus system is. It's not been serving the public interest properly for some decades, probably here, and it shows. And you know, as you say, we're just in a situation where people are walking away, as John said before, from the buses, and then the more that people walk away, the bigger our problem becomes, because then, you know, the system has got less money in it, therefore it's at risk of shrinking further. So that's where the proposal for 16 to 18 travel comes in, because we have to stop that and get people back on the buses. In terms of the process from here, one of the things that's held us up was the government laying an order that gives me the power to raise the precept to then use mayoral functions under the Bus Services Act 2017. Now, that order has finally been laid last week or two, yeah. And I can't remember now, I think it's got to sort of be laid for 30 days or more before it actually then gets debated. So, I mean, current projections, we think it'll be enforced by early April. So, legally, then, there is no impediment to our use of the powers in the Bus Services Act 2017. The only thing I would say on that is, you know, as we kind of face, as I say, reform has got to happen, and we've got two broad routes under this Act: enhanced partnership and franchising. And I'm required to maintain an open mind about which can best deliver what we want. You know, what gives us the benefits that we want, and obviously, you know, what does it at the least financial cost. And this is the assessment, the formal legal assessment that TFGM are carrying out. And part of the precept would pay for the completion of that assessment. So the funds that we're raising. One thing though that is in the back of my mind is, and it touches on this debate about rail and rail franchising. You know, we are currently ruled out from having an operator of last resort, a public operator of last resort in Greater Manchester, well, anywhere. And you know, I think there is a question mark in my mind about. This won't delay our attempts to move forward using the Bus Services Act 2017 and its powers, but I think in any scenario, you know, you're in a if you're entirely dependent on what comes forward from the market, it's not where you would want to be, is it, in terms of then moving forward. So, you know, there's a question mark about whether or not we need to go back to the government and say that not to use as a first call, but as a last resort. It should be there, and I still feel that that's something that we should be calling for. The other thing, just to say, and I'm afraid I'm sorry to have to repeat this again, on the current finances, if you look at the bus market in Greater Manchester, I'm looking to Steve, and I'm pretty sure you back me up on this. It's impossible to see how we could begin to get it to where we would want it to be without investment from one source or another. You know, it's really important for me to be able to get this message over to you all, that it can't be done by use of regulatory powers alone. It does require investment to get more people using buses, to get the fares to a point where people can afford them, to improve the quality of the buses. So this is a market that needs investment, and we're going to have to work quite hard to find that investment. Maybe the government should be helping us more. As the first area to use these powers, you would think that they would have an obligation to try and help us make a success of this endeavour. So we might be making a call on the government as well. But this is a major undertaking. We are trying to turn around 30 years of decline in the Greater Manchester bus market. It is a pretty dysfunctional market as it stands, as you rightly said. So please, I'm sure you won't, but do not underestimate the scale of the job that TFGM and myself we have before us in trying to get the buses back to where we would want them to be.
Tim?
I'm afraid it's more questions about buses, but it's the topic of the evening. So the first question is obviously our £8 per head for a bandy property is paying largely for the young people pass and for some of the work to get bus reform off the ground, I guess. And you just talked about the need for investment. So I suppose I'm asking, in a year or two's time, are you going to be coming back and saying we've done the work and now actually we need more money to pay for the quality bus service that we need in Greater Manchester? That's one question. Second question is just to go back to the young people's pass. So as I understand, this is for free bus travel and not tram and train travel. Is that right? Yeah.
Bus travel.
Yeah,
Yep.
bus travel.
Yep.
So for me, one of the great benefits of that is it is sort of economic freedom, I suppose, so people can afford to go to a job somewhere else in the conurbation and are not prevented. Yeah. But I suppose lots of journeys in the conurbation are really rubbish by bus, aren't they? So from Rochdale to Salford Quays or Prestwich to Airport City, these are not nice bus journeys. They're great tram journeys or rail journeys, and I'm just wondering how we're sort of creating a bit of a two-class tier almost, whereas older people are sort of speeding past on the tram and their young colleagues are sat on a bus. Sort of thing. So that's one question. The other question is about, we both know that 99.99% of young people are not involved in antisocial behaviour, so that's fine. But whether or not the perception of particularly an older person, and I'm counting myself as an older person here, say in the evening, would I be put off using a bus in the dark because of the fear of like 30 young people, doing nothing wrong and doing what young people do, which is fine. But is another person put off by that? And do we actually create a different problem, which puts some people off bus usage by trying to solve that? If that makes sense. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I think I have to be honest and say, I can't rule out that this will be the last time we were coming to you to say we need more investment in buses. I think that's just a statement of kind of on openness and transparency, to be honest. I think this bus market is so dysfunctional, in my view, that it's going to take quite a lot of effort and possibly investment to put it back on its feet. Genuinely, I can't sit here tonight and say I know exactly how much, because that will depend on your level of ambition as well, in terms of what you want for your boroughs, in terms of what is the basic coverage that you think you need in Bury to therefore constitute a basic bus service for your borough and all communities in your borough. What are the basic standards we expect in terms of disability access? What do we think about ticketing and the cost of ticketing? So it's not for me to determine, it's for all of us to determine what level of bus service do we want to pay for. And it is going to be a collective endeavour, because it will probably mean we have to go to the Greater Manchester public and say, well, if you want that, we have to raise this much to pay for that. And for those who say they don't use the buses, there's two things to say to that. Congestion is kind of at saturation levels, isn't it? And so therefore it will benefit everybody to get more people on the buses. But also, if you look at the London experience, London has been the mirror opposite of GM over the last 30 years, where they have invested in their market. They've got more people of all walks of life using the buses, and the cost of bus travel has come down. So they've got a virtuous circle going. We've got the opposite. So there is as I say, there's quite a big argument to be won, but I wouldn't be honest with you if I said it's not going to be the case that we need to come back for more. However, I do think we need to make a case to the government as part of our spending review bid to say we need more money, more revenue support in our city regional transport system. The Prosperity Review commissioned by Sir Richard Lees reported on Friday, and that strongly endorsed the recommendations of the National Infrastructure Commission, which said that cities like ours, city regions like ours, need more powers and funding at the city regional level to run a proper integrated transport system. And I think we do need to make that case to the government. On the second part, around the Young People's Pass, it is a pilot, a 2-year pilot. So at the moment, the full cost is unknown because it's linked to how many young people would use it. We don't know, and that's why we need to run it as a pilot. But also, I'm determined to keep the cost of it down as much as I can with relation to calls on public funds. So I think they're the 9 FE colleges now of Greater Manchester. Have I got that right? I think they're 9. They've all put through their boards that they are prepared to work with us to transfer the money that they currently use to buy bus passes, because they buy a lot of bus passes for this age group, that they will divert that money, hopefully with the approval of the English Schools Funding Agency, to a fund that will then collectivise that money. We've got a project group opening up now in terms of commercial sponsorship. There is already commercial interest in the Opportunity Pass, so we think we can further bring down the cost through that way. I think we are proposing to use some mayoral priority capacity funding. Have I got that right, Richard?
No, that's for bus reform.
Is that bus? Yeah. There's a mix of funding that we are trying to maximise what we can get to keep the cost low. And so, you know, hopefully the call will be as low as possible. In terms of the 2-tier transport thing, if I could make it Metrolink, I would. But, you know, it's hard enough to fund a free bus pass, I think, at this moment in time. But I believe, hopefully like you do, that one of the big things that's holding us back, and actually what holds young people back in all of the boroughs represented here, is the sense that they can't have the ambition they would really want. They have to go to where they can afford. And that shouldn't be something that is happening at 17, 18. You know, they should be going to the college that they really want to go to, or the apprenticeship that they really would love to do. And I was in Oldham the other week at an opening of an academy there, and I was saying to the young people in the room, you know, when you look at that city centre out of your window, because you could see it, you know, you can see the big buildings rising up. I said, look, I want you to feel that you can go and work there. You know, that is exciting, not intimidating to you, but you know, a place that you can actually aspire to go and work. And it is I think it is quite a big statement, this, of who we want to be in terms of the future economy. But, and here's the but, it should come at you know, with a clear level of responsibility. So to pick up your antisocial behaviour point, I mean, I hear that criticism made. I don't think the Opportunity Pass should just be given and that's that. You know, I'm putting to our Youth Combined Authority the proposal that, let's say, people were guilty of antisocial behaviour 3 times on a bus, that they should just have the pass suspended or possibly completely revoked. You know, it shouldn't be a kind of case of saying, well, you know, here's your pass and you can do whatever you like. So it is about a contract with young people, and I think that will mean something, I hope, if they see real value in what we're creating. And just to add to that point about value, we are working with sporting, cultural and commercial organisations to put other things on the pass. So, you know, free entry to various events linked to their bus travel, so that it really becomes a passport to Greater Manchester. That's what we're trying to do. And it might have commercial sponsorship that might get them sort of, you know, reduced meal costs or whatever it might be. So it could be quite, you know, something they would value quite highly. We hope it will. And therefore, you know, that contract with them about, you know, potentially losing it would mean something. So all of this is to be developed as we take it forward. But, you know, I'm grateful for what you said about it being something that will certainly help young people get on in life.
Yvonne?
I was going to ask a question very similar to what Tim asked, actually, about the precept and what's going to happen in future years. Because we've seen with the police precepts, it's gone from an extra £5 to then £12 and then to £24, which has caused some sharp intakes of breath, I have to say. And if the same thing happens again with the bus reform extra precept, I think, you know, it starts to be seen as a burden. And the problem with council tax is that it always is a regressive tax, isn't it? It always hits the ones who can't afford to pay it more than the people who are living in the mansions. And that reform is overdue, in my opinion, you know, but it's not in our gift. So obviously, you can't predict what's going to happen, but I think you might find that people start voting against the precept rises if you get too many sort of clustering together, I would think, maybe in future years, which would be a pity because I think we all approve of what the motivation is. Just a second thing on it as well, I fully applaud everything you're trying to do for 16 to 18-year-olds, keep them in college, keep them with the possibility of going to work. Great reasoning there. But I think when you came to Brinnington, when you were a candidate for being Greater Mayor, somebody actually mentioned to you that it was school-age children as well who were finding they couldn't afford to go to school. And I think some woman there said she had to decide which children to send on which day. One could go 3 days a week, 1 week, and the other 2, and so on. So that rings a bell now because in Stockport they've looked at abolishing subsidised travel for children at faith schools. They've decided not to do it this year because it's not a very popular decision, and decided that people who'd already made the commitment could carry on getting the subsidy. But those will be children, you know, from maybe 11 upwards and so forth, or even younger, I don't know. So maybe the school-age children should be as much of a priority as the 16 to 18-year-olds.
Thanks very much, Yvonne. I certainly understand your point about, you know, future years. I guess I'm just being honest to say that I can't rule out that there will not be increases in future years. Partly because, and again, I don't want ever to sound party political in this role because I'm not in this role to do all of that stuff. It does require, I think, a change of heart from central government in terms of the burden of taxation. It does feel to me at the moment there is an attempt to put more and more onto the council tax. And as we all know, that isn't going to be fair in terms of how that then plays out across the population in terms of who is paying what, because it isn't a particularly fair form of taxation, and we've got the whole revaluation issue that's never been addressed by any government, to be honest. So I think that does need to be challenged. You know, funding what I would say are essential public services, buses, police, fire, almost exclusively through the council tax and precept is not a sustainable approach, and I think that point has to be made. And I think we will continue to make it. But while trying to be constructive with the government and trying to move these important agendas forward. So the issue is, though, I'm not coming to you with what I'm trying to do is obviously each year come and say, well, what is the minimum we need to move the agenda forward? So £8 last year, £9 this year for Band D. You know, what you'll see there is we're only coming, you know, we're not coming asking for more than we need, and it's building this in a sort of cautious, prudent way. But I cannot rule out the future years question, I'm afraid, to say to you. It would be wrong for me to do that. On the school age point, again, it's in many ways the same answer to the one I gave to Tim. It's a question of priorities. If I could do, I would do. But it's a question of having so much money and what then becomes the priority. Now, the judgment I've made is that point at 16 is a crucial moment where almost life-changing decisions are made. If you kind of say, well, I can't go to that college, which was one I really want to go to. I'm going to go to that one because I can afford to get there, or I can walk there. Or, you know, I won't take that apprenticeship over there. I'll have to go to this one, which isn't what I really want. I mean, it's a moment where decisions are made that really do, and young people are often a bit more out on their own trying to make things work. So the logic of this, of course, is it's in many ways an attempt to replace the education maintenance allowance as was a few years ago, to say those considerations of cost shouldn't stop people kind of following their ambitions at that particular age, recognising that that is an age where they do make some pretty big decisions on what they intend to do in later life. If I could do more, Metrolink, younger, I would, but you know, I would be coming asking you for a much bigger precept if I was to do all of that.
Anne? Anne.
Thank you, Andy. Just a couple of things. I think the narrative around it's going to be absolutely key for all of us to be able to sell it on the doorstep and to do that, and especially whatever comes next. So hopefully there'll be enough there in that narrative for that to be an easy sell to people. I was interested in your thing you said about London, where you said that obviously the way that London works and whether or not there's who pays for the London buses. Is that on a precept or anything? I'm also interested in how the precept might be used in other areas. Like, how's Andy Street planning on using his precept in West Midlands, and what types of things is he thinking about? And the final thing is whether or not there's any thought. Edinburgh introduced a tourist tax last week, and if there's any thought in raising money from people that come and use our world-class city and then leave it again, rather than just the people that live here taking the entire burden. And that might not necessarily be for things like buses, but obviously the more money that's raised, the further other things can go. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Anne. I think you're right about the narrative being really, really key. So for me, the narrative is, you know, if you carry on allowing bus patronage to drop, then I'm afraid services will continue to drop. It's as simple as that. You know, if the market is shrinking, then routes are going to get cut, fares are going to carry on going up. So at some point, you have to intervene in the market to try and stop it from declining. And we've got to get that 26% figure of 16 to 18-year-olds up to that 3/4. That should be their primary mode of transport, as far as I'm concerned. And obviously, by doing that, the scheme itself, the 16 to 18 scheme, will start to shore up particularly routes that might not be the obvious commuter routes that are coming into the city centre, because some of these, I mean, Tim was saying before about, you know, they're going sort of strange journeys. Well, some of those routes might be more localised bus routes that are going towards colleges, or, you know, so they may actually have the effect of shoring up routes that are potentially at risk because they're not the most heavily used routes. So the narrative is partly that, but it's also that I wasn't prepared to kind of go down this path on bus reform without anything to sort of help the public. So it is a difficult time in terms of council tax, but it's my judgment that it's not just young people paying these bus fares, it's their parents, it's their grandparents. You know, this has an impact on quite a lot of people. £4 for a single bus journey, and because young people often can't afford the weekly, they have to pay those high prices, you know, one-off high prices. It's not really right. So the narrative, I agree with you, is important. It is about, yes, benefiting young people, but in the end benefiting everybody by getting a bigger, better bus system that is actually moving back in the right direction with growing passenger numbers, and that's the logic of the argument we're putting forward. In terms of TfL, I think the Mayor may raise a precept, but I'm pretty also certain that TfL get a revenue subsidy from central government that they've always had over many years, particularly since the election of the first Mayor back in the late 90s, early part of the 2000s. You know, so they've been making the argument for transport funding for 20 years, more than we have, pretty much. And so they've got a revenue stream that we just don't. And we gathered yesterday in Sheffield to launch the Transport for the North strategic plan. And I was making this point, you know, if it's good enough for London, it's good enough for us. You know, that's got to be our mantra in everything. You know, the big thing that I think is outrageous when you compare it. It's not just the cost of a single bus journey between London and here. It's £1.50 to have a single bus journey, capped, £1.50 in London. And if you get on another bus within an hour, you don't pay anything. So that's one thing. But then the second thing is, because they've got a different system, they can cap overall spend on public transport in a given day. And I think it's currently about £9, less actually, about £8 something or other. So it doesn't matter if you're using tube or overland train or bus, that's where your spending stops. Here, if you go on a bus, go on a Metrolink, go on a train, well, you can rack it well up into 15, 20, even more if you were travelling around a lot. So the incentives don't work for public transport here, and our argument should be, give us what London has got in terms of powers and subsidy. Andy Street isn't, as I understand it, I think he is raising a I don't know what their plans are, to be honest. Are they not this year? But they're not reforming their buses, partly because they've got a very different bus market. They have one operator, pretty much, National Express, and I think they control around 85% of the West Midlands bus market. So it isn't a system that has the structural problems that ours has, and hence they don't, at this point in time, want to move in that direction. On the tourist tax, I'd be open. I mean, I'd be interested to see what all of you think, but I would be quite open-minded about it, in that it's something that is commonly paid in other European cities, and I think partly what it would do is then give people that higher level of public transport that they would expect in a destination city. It's why we're talking to your kind of licensing colleagues about reform of the taxi system, because I do favour a system that has single standards and hopefully single livery, so that visitors to the city can see our taxi service clearly, as well as a bus service that has a single livery. And then obviously that operates alongside Metrolink. That's how I think we lift ourselves up to the level of a world-class city in terms of transport. And a tourist tax, if the government won't help us, if they at least gave us the power to levy that, well, it was certainly something that I would be interested in, because I think it's something that people often expect to pay.
Me? So, I'll have a pitch on the tourist tax. Manchester, and I'll take the B, is a city of industry. We attract industry. It's about industry. We're not a tourist. We happen to be a tourist destination, but we have and we do sell ourselves on our innovation and ability to change. A tourist tax, I think, would send the wrong message to industry coming to invest here. The B says it all to me. We are a hive, and that's Manchester for you. So I'm going to start on the buses, if I may, because we've covered a lot on buses, and it's on the same topic. The 26% of 16 to 18-year-olds,
yep.
You say it needs intervention. We have intervened in the bus market. We have spent, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 10 billion on Metro. And so naturally, we're going to attract people off. How many people, how many children use the Metro as the primary mode of transport? And given a choice of, say, Altrincham to Manchester, I'm not going to go on the bus, and even a kid's not going to go on the bus. They're going to take the Metro. So the Metro has taken those clients. I don't hear that within it. When I hear 34 million fewer journeys, there's bound to be, because we've put a phenomenal Metro system in. And it's not that I disagree. We do need some massive bus reform, but it needs balancing with that. We have put billions into the Metro and not into the buses. We've actually stolen the passengers. And the new investment in Northern Rail and the infrastructure we've just spoken about from Network Rail is also going to steal passengers. So that needs balancing. So I don't believe we've had a fair picture. We've just sort of cried about buses, but actually we've attacked the market for years in Manchester.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Chair. I'll come back to the tourist tax in a second. Just my thoughts on that. I think it's really important not to see this as one mode, kind of exclusively then versus another mode. I'm a tram passenger and I'm not a bus passenger. The way the London system works is it's highly integrated, and therefore it allows people to easily switch between different modes to complete a journey that kind of might be bus partly and then Metrolink and maybe finishing up with bus. And I think that's where you've got to get to, where people use the system in that way, or linked to our B-Lines proposal, where they might cycle a bit, park, and then get on Metrolink, and then that's where I think we've got to aim to being, rather than people thinking they're exclusively a customer of the buses or exclusively a customer of Metrolink. I mean, if places that have Metrolink, young people find it still more attractive to use Metrolink, then obviously our costs of the bus pass will come down because they won't be people who take up the journeys on the free bus pass, and therefore it won't be used. What it might do, though, is, of course, if you look at a borough like Wigan or Bolton where they don't have it, it obviously might be heavily used in an area like that to give them sort of access to affordable transport. So this is why we're constructing it as a pilot, just to understand the impact that it has on the transport market, and to encourage young people to maybe use bus alongside Metrolink, because they'll be able to afford to do that because they've not incurred the cost. Steve, you look like you wanted to add something. It's all right, yeah, do.
Respond to the question about the mode share, if you'd like.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So the data we've got is not, well, it's in the period 2015 to 2017, and there's lots of it, but in the round, in that period, there's about a third of young people either walk or use a bicycle. A bit less than a third who are either a car or van driver or passenger. 3% rail, 5% tram, and 25.6% on Metrolink, and there's a little bit of other in taxis. Sorry, on bus. 25.6% on bus, so very low. That will clearly be moving as a result of the growth in the Metrolink passengers, but it starts from a very low base.
For me, the shocking figure there is a third use the car. I mean, that is a really high figure. And our policy has got to be to give people alternatives to the car, not just teenagers, but everybody. We've got to encourage people to commute differently. The thing about bus and Metrolink is, I know you say we've introduced a good system, and we have. You're absolutely right, Chair, to say that. But the trouble with the way things are at the moment is they're not working in a complementary fashion. So bus routes have sometimes been withdrawn where there are Metrolink services. So it's not a case of one supports the other. Or even we've had bus trying to undercut Metrolink, haven't we, in some cases. So this idea that they're competitive modes is not the way to go. What we've got to build towards here is a London-style integrated system that allows people to transfer easily between the modes and complete journeys that might be across a number of modes. On the tourist tax, I hear what you say, and I'm not necessarily. I'm just obviously anyone in my position might be attracted to it in that it's not necessarily GM residents that I'm coming to fund some of the necessary improvements that we need. And I think, as Anne said, people coming here who are taking advantage of the city in many ways. We've got a lot of visitors from Paris in our city tonight, and I think they've been they've certainly been looked after. I understand in Shambles Square. They've made use of several of our facilities, and they're very welcome, of course. But whether it's that or whether it's the government devolving air passenger duty to us or whatever it might be, I think the national infrastructure are right, in my view, to say city regions like ours need a much more substantial, devolved transport budget to begin to bring about some of these improvements that we're all discussing.
Thank you. So just moving, so I've got a few, I'm sorry, I'm going to bore everybody now, but the first report, General Budget Overview, page 4 or page 28. Line 3, communities and businesses hope and confidence for the future. So that's the sort of introduction. It then goes on strategy for our people and place. We've got to look after our people, but I go hark back to Manchester being a place of industry and business, which actually will fund our people. It'll fund our people with tax, it'll fund our people with jobs. But within this whole report, there's about 5 lines about promoting business within GM. If we move to page 29, we have invested in a multi-million-pound business productivity and inclusive growth programme, 26 million, 6 million a year. We're spending 3.9 million a year on transport policy, yet only 6 million a year on productivity growth. And couple that to the business rates retention growth pilot, which has given us £200 million. Should we not be I'm not saying changing the focus, but in our introductory, we offer it at least a third of our introductory fanfare, yet we don't touch upon it. There's probably, in a 10-page report, 5 lines on what we might want to do for productivity, etc. And this ties into Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, because if we can get our productivity up, we don't need as many houses. It complements everything. Yet, it's just not there. Is that intentional, or do we just not think about what we're going to do for our businesses within GM? I don't see it.
If I may, Chair, I feel that's a little unfair in that the third bullet point talks about good employment for all in our thriving, productive, zero-carbon economy. And then if you look on page 30, there's quite a significant section on the economy and supporting businesses, a reference to the local industrial strategy. So it is there. In many ways, the decision, as I said at the beginning, to start the year with the publication of the spatial framework was to provide some business confidence. So obviously this budget proposal needs to be seen alongside those other significant proposals that we made around spatial development, housing, clean air and transport. And it all needs to link to what's coming very shortly, which is the local industrial strategy. So it is there, I would say, but actually it's going to be there in a much bigger way once we publish the local industrial strategy, because it was always clear that that was going to be the place where we were going to lay out our thinking on the economy, on business support, and it's why Sir Richard Lees commissioned the Prosperity Review, which reported last Friday. It is a very impressive piece of work by a very impressive group of individuals who've given a lot of their time to us to study the evidence behind the Greater Manchester economy. Productivity comes out of it as a big issue, and the panel themselves pointed towards the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter as one way of beginning to raise standards of employment and therefore address this issue around productivity. There is much more I could say about that, but it is there. It is obviously one of the very big and key priorities. I mean, and all of this links to skills. If you're in a room with any businesses at the moment, skills will come up as a top order issue for them. And particularly with Brexit and the potential skills gap that may emerge as a result of that. That takes me back to the logic about the 16 to 18 pass. We have to get better at getting the best out of our people if we are then to help our businesses get the best out of themselves. Without that supply of talented young people, we aren't going to build that thriving economy that we need. So I suppose, sorry, just to finalise, to answer your question, it is there, but it's probably not there as much as it should have been, because we know that the local industrial strategy is literally now around the corner. We are hoping to finalise this by the end of March with the government, and it will lay out a prospectus for business development here of a kind that we've never seen before, and I'm very hopeful for what it might achieve. It will identify key sectors of our economy as advised by the Prosperity Panel. No surprises, those being advanced manufacturing materials, health innovation, and the green economy. It will talk about our ambitions to take jobs to the north of the conurbation. So, we've talked about the idea of tech city or graphene city as we start to try and take some of the kind of exciting things happening here, but make sure we can put them into mass production elsewhere in the city region. There will be much more to come, and I apologise if it's not enough here, but I can assure you there's a lot more coming in that space.
Well, I did struggle to find it, and I find about 10 million a year, and relative to the whole, I was disappointed. But let's see, I may be startled next year. On that, any more questions on Andy's budgets? Thank you very much for attendance.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Do you have a comment, Richard, or no, just saying you're next?
Sorry, it was just to say on that very point, if you do the sums on business rates, you'll see the amount of money that's come into the Combined Authority, the amount of money that's programmed for spending at the moment by the CA, and the money we're proposing to give back to district councils. So there's a gap in there, because there are some further funds being retained for future programmes, of which the local industrial strategy and the employment charter are part of that, so that when those come forward, we do have some money set aside for them, but because they've not been surfaced and approved, then the funding hasn't been released. So we do have some other monies put aside, but not in the budget at the moment.
There is, if I may, Chair, very briefly, there's one further thing to add, which isn't in this budget, partly because we haven't had the details about it yet, but there is a government proposal for a UK shared prosperity fund, which is effectively the successor to European funding. And we are told that we will receive details of it imminently. Indeed, I think the Minister is ringing me about it tomorrow, so I wish I could have been in a position to tell you more tonight, but I'm only getting the phone call tomorrow. We want that fund basically to be at a level that European funding is currently at. Because at the moment, Europe give us funding and then the UK government matches it. So we're saying we need it at the matched level. We believe it should be fully devolved and then fully flexible. So that funding, when we know what it is and how much it is, would be the funding that would go behind the local industrial strategy. So what you've got in this paper does not represent the totality of what we expect to be devoting to the support for the GM economy. It's just simply that those discussions with the government are not finalised yet. But that expect to see more details of that soon. You know, our hope is that that will be a major amount of devolved funding that we can use to support economic development in Greater Manchester.
Thank you for that. I'd just be good to see some massive ambition there. Any more? No. Great. Thank you again, Richard.
Okay, we've got a number of further budget reports now. The first is item 6D, which is the Gmca revenue general budget. This comprises both the contributions from district councils, which comprise of £8.8 million, together with substantial government funding coming in through government grants. And just back to the previous discussion about the skills agenda, the devolution of adult education budgets from August this year now, 2019, and we'll receive just over £60 million in the current year, and then topped up for the remainder of next year and the 5 months next year, and then another 7 months after that. So we'll be running about £92 million a year of devolved funding for adult education, of which the first chunk is in here. We as mentioned earlier, we have retained some of the business rates pilot money that's been received by the Combined Authority. The report later on the agenda deals with the allocation of the majority of that funding back to districts to support their general pressures. We've identified some concrete areas where the CA has already agreed to invest business rates. The full fibre programme and project management is a case in point. I'll call it the unified architecture that we've seen before, the grand title I can't remember. A number of programmes like that the CA has approved, but there will be other things coming along, which the local industrial strategy and the employment charter are some of those, so they will come later, and we've got some money held in reserves for those. There are a number of budget pressures, as you'd imagine, on the Combined Authority budget, and to the extent that those are sort of classed as internal, dealing with GDPR, with IT strategy and growth, funding for public sector reform work. We will be funding those from internal sources through underspends where they're one-off. We've got some underspends in the current year that comes in the later report, but also generating extra income from particularly from the cash management activities of the Combined Authority. So we'll be funding those without recourse to asking districts for further funds. So it's again, it's a picture that reflects the pressure on districts. We've brought some considerable detail. In the past, we've considered the increased funding going to Midas and Marketing Manchester, which comes from the business rates money, but actually there's a bigger programme going on supported through this, and we brought in the appendices here some detail of that, and we'll be seeking the CA approval to the overall level of funding going into Midas and Marketing Manchester. That's been a bit hidden in the past, and the focus has just been on the growth, but we've got our colleagues to in the growth company to provide that, and included in there is some narrative about the productivity programme, which is the 4-year programme that we're running at the present time. So that's all on that particular one that I'd have to say.
Any questions? Just me, one question. Section 2.4, GM Youth Combined Authority, £50,000. How many people are engaging with that? I'm sure you won't have the answer, but I would like to know, for £50,000, how many people are engaging with the Youth Combined Authority?
Okay, there certainly came, some representatives came to the last Combined Authority meeting, and I know they work across Jim. I think it's 50 people directly on the council, I think, aren't there?
The council is approximately 50 young people, but that engages with the forums that exist at district level as well, so there's a broader level of engagement with young people. But again, we can bring back to the committee more detail on how that works in practice.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Next, any questions? No? Next one.
The next one's just a representation of the waste budget. You had this at your previous meeting. The Part A report is unchanged. There's a Part B report elsewhere on the agenda about commercial considerations for discussion of that. But it's no change to what you've seen. Deals with the level of the base budget, the levy on districts, the allocation of the levy, and the planned levy refunds to districts in 2018-19. So nothing more. You've had all of that before.
Do you want to plot on?
Yep. Revenue budget. I think the two bits here are a general underspend on the CA's overall budget, an underspend on the mayoral general budget, a very small underspend on the fire and rescue budget, and you may have seen some recent press interest in the Moorland fires and the Bellwyn claim. I notified the government officials back in June that we were likely to want to claim for the expenditure on the Moorland fires, which has now increased to 1.1 million. Now we've got the bills in. That has been sat with government since June. The Mayor wrote, I think just prior to Christmas, to the Secretary of State and has had an answer to say they're considering it along with the Home Office. End of story. At the present time, we've got a bill of 1.1 million unfunded on that. We've got the transport budget through TFGM is itself day-to-day breaking even, but substantial slippage in some of the work on bus reform and some of the scheme development work. So there's a reduced use of reserves from TFGM. The important bit from districts is probably at paragraph 3.11, which is the business rates income. So we've received just over £30 million in business rates income for 2017-18. We don't know about that till districts have closed their accounts in sort of between May and July of 2018, and we have been in discussion with district treasurers about the amount of money to be retained by the CA and the amount to be retained by the CA, and then the amount to be returned by districts, and the method by doing that, reflecting both the level of growth in individual districts, but also that GM earns this as a whole. Without the GM being a mayoral combined authority, we wouldn't have any of this. So there's an element of reward for growth, but also reward for the core population, and a proposal to return 25 million. We'll be here this time next year, I would think, with expecting circa 30 million this year to be earned by the districts. We won't know till they've confirmed in their accounts, and there'll no doubt be a further conversation about how much of that is retained at the CA level and how much is returned to districts. So I think you mentioned earlier on the 200 million. The pilot operates across 3 years. This is the second year in. We're in the pilot for next year as well as being confirmed. We're earning just over 60 million a year across GM from that pilot. Added together, it is around 200 million pounds. That's some, I should think, more than anyone else other than possibly London is earning from business rates pilots. And there's only 4 mayoral CAs and Cornwall, for some strange reason, who have this facility. But some good news story there, and I think all your treasurers have probably noted that and squirreled it away in their budgets already.
It is good news because that's growth, that's new businesses that's not existing. So, any questions? Fantastic. So, oh, sorry, I apologise.
Hopefully it'll be quite quick because I think it's possibly a don't know answer. We did have a presentation on the new waste contracts that were being put out to tender, and there was obviously some question about the biomass, and it's now here in section 4.2 under a key area of uncertainty. So and are you on the Part B report? I'm on the part. Oh, sorry, have we not done Part B yet? No. Oh, I do apologise. I'll ask it later. Okay, on that. Well, before Part B.
So there's the capital programme. So just on to the capital.
And you've got Brexit before Part B.
There's a capital programme here. Again, the schemes, transport schemes and non-transport schemes are very much as you've seen it. The waste capital programme is set out in detail on the Part B report because there are commercial issues in there. And in terms of the fire service, which is part of the mayoral budget, there was a sort of roll forward of the current programme, pre-programme for change. So when programme for change returns, there will be a revised capital programme coming forward. So this is in a sense a piece of work that will be changing almost certainly by the month. So we will be coming back to this in due course.
Any questions? No. Anything we need to know or mention with respect to those reports? Thank you. So on that, we are on to our Brexit monitoring report. Who's giving that?
Sorry, Chair, I didn't get a chance to ask my question under Part B, did I?
No, we're going to come to Part B in a moment.
Sorry.
Let's keep Brexit. Nobody wants to talk about Brexit. Sure.
Okay, well, taking that prompt, this was requested. So the report provides an update on the current position in terms of Brexit, which is already hopelessly out of date. But attached to this report is the last Brexit monitor, which gives or attempts to give an assessment of trends within the GM economy. This is a monthly report that goes to every CA. There'll be one in the coming month with more up-to-date information. I'm not proposing to run through the latest national position because things are changing on a daily basis. But in section 2, just a reminder of the combined authorities' policy position in terms of Brexit. In September 18, the combined authority agreed a position in respect of no deal, which is outlined in paragraph 2.1. And in December, some more detailed modelling on the economic impact for Greater Manchester was submitted to the combined authority for consideration, and there's more detailed background reports for those who haven't seen that analysis. The section 3 is perhaps where we might focus briefly this evening. We've got Paul Argyle, who chairs the Greater Manchester Resilience Forum, and in sections 3 and 4 we get into a brief update as to preparedness across Greater Manchester by public agencies and partners, Manchester Airport. Other partners are involved in the Resilience Forum. Some of the activity that's underway that's being coordinated and supported by the combined authority. In section 4, we get into the combined authority as an agency, as an organisation, and some of the work that's underway internally here in respect of not just the policy issues. Andy Burnham, the Mayor, touched on the position in terms of the Shared Prosperity Fund, but we've also got responsibilities you'll be fully aware of in respect of a frontline emergency service, fire, and waste disposal contracts. So there's work underway in preparation for a Brexit, notwithstanding the scenario that we'll end up at. But Section 3 is perhaps where we should focus. So I've just asked Paul to briefly run through some of the exercises that have been underway in recent months, the range of agencies involved in that, and give you a flavour of the vast amount of work that's underway.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So as members will be aware, every region has a resilience forum. Ours is called the Greater Manchester Resilience Forum, and ours is a very broad and mature partnership, and it's made up of what are called Category 1 and 2 responders. So Category 1 like police, fire, ambulance, British Transport Police, all the local authorities, health protection agencies, etc. And then Category 2 responders, which may be private organisations, the utilities, gas, water, electricity, and also transport, health and safety executive, etc. The reason I mention those is we all work together consistently and as Andrew mentioned, involved in the planning and preparation. Of course, we plan and prepare for civil contingencies, issues rising always, at all times. And the mantra across all resilience forums we're using is planning for the unusual in the usual way. So we haven't recreated new systems and structures. We have examined our processes, systems and structures and made sure they're fit for purpose and considered the prevailing or presented risks. So we've done our assessments, we've looked at planning assumptions, and we've reassigned and re-looked at some of our plans. And then, as Andrew mentioned, we've run a series of exercises. So as it mentions in the paper, in December, we ran an exercise with what is called our Resilience Development Group and some partners to test out some scenarios running through prior to Brexit, leading into Brexit, and going through into a period shortly after the EU exit, as and when that would happen. We took that learning into a further exercise at the beginning of February with all 10 local authorities. So we held that, and there was over 100 participants to make sure local authorities and broader partners are supported in some of that broader thinking. Of course, this is all built on the fact that, as has already been mentioned, all public and private and all organisations have got their own responsibility. This is taking a broader view and across the partnership. And then we fed all that into an exercise on the 6th of February with the Gmca EU Exit Readiness Group, the Greater Manchester Resilience Forum Executive, and some broader partners. And again, we came through and tested our thinking and exercised our thinking, planning and preparations. And from that, actually, we are planning a couple more scenario planning workshops for invited partners. And as we always do, building on our normal processes, we'll put in place a command, control and communication structure. So that will be ready to stand up and operate on a weekly through to a daily 24/7 basis as necessary, so that we are looking at prevailing risks, rising risks, issues, if they come about, and we're well planned, well prepared, and we can deal with them. So that is what will be going on across all resilience forums across the country.
Any questions? No, that's good. So, can we note that report, please? Thank you for that. Yeah.
Is Cobra involved with this via the Home Office? Are they coordinating this? When you say it's a national situation in readiness if we come out?
Two things on that, John. Yes. In our normal approach for dealing with incidents is to have a command and control structure, which then would, if required, and if it was escalated to that extent, go through our government liaison officers to speak to Cobra. So we would, if there was an incident just in Greater Manchester, then our strategic coordinating group would liaise with the government liaison officers and speak to Cobra. So of course, this is potentially either a local, regional or national event. So all that thought process is there. And of course, on a regular basis, we're liaising with all relevant government departments.
Okay, thank you for your time. So we've been distributed the register of key decisions. Could we note those? They've all had the link emailed to you. Date and time of next meeting, 6 o'clock here on the 19th of March. If we could be quora and do our best, that would be great. At that, we'll cut the live feed, and I don't think no members of the public. We're all right, apart from the IT guy. So thank you.
Colleagues don't want to stay, you're happy to go. So.
It's not.